We will be starting now, if that's okay. Firstly, thank you so much all for coming on this slightly miserable day. And so this event is called The Guide to Asylum for GCC Citizens in the UK, the Process, Procedures and Pitfalls. And it's been organised by, thank you very much, it's been organised by Asylum for Democracy and Human Rights. I should have a banner up somewhere, but I think we have difficulty with that. And Asylum is a human rights NGO focused on Bahrain and also other GCC states. Alongside Asylum today we have Consonance, which is an asylum charity, formerly Asylum A, that provides forms of legal aid and assistance to those seeking asylum and immigration matters, as well as Latitude Law, which is a legal firm based in Manchester. So this event aims to sort of shed light on these issues on asylum, and for those in any stage of this asylum, for those thinking about it, currently in it, or appeal, any stage, this event is sort of geared towards you, and particularly for those from the GCC states, because including Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, UAE, Oman, Kuwait, because of the increasing numbers of people forced to flee these countries in recent years. We're very lucky to be joined by several legal professionals and immigration experts with us, who will be sharing some of their expertise and field any questions that you have. So this event is really for you, so any questions you have at all, this event will hopefully be here to help. Luckily, you won't be hearing too much from me, so myself, I work at Asylum for Democracy and Human Rights, which is a human rights organisation. So I cover human rights and issues in the Gulf, but don't have a legal background. So fortunately, we do have some legal experts with us here today. So to my right, we have Aisha Azam, who's an immigration solicitor and supervisor at Consonance. And in the middle, we have Gary McKindu, who is the managing director and solicitor for Latitude Law, which is a law firm in Manchester. And on the right side, we have Azhar Iqbal, who's an immigration and human rights lawyer based here in London. And another colleague will be joining us later on as well, hopefully. So we're very lucky to have such a wealth of expertise here on the panel. Most importantly, we have you here in the audience, so hopefully this event will be very useful for you. So just to run over the proceedings of the event, we'll start with a brief introduction from Jawad Fayrouz, who's the chairman of Asylum for Democracy and Human Rights, and then we'll hear from each of the speakers. One of whom, Gary, has a short presentation prepared, which will be a bit of an introduction to these issues, and then we'll hear from each speaker in a sort of informal way, and just a heads up that we have the room in this setting so we can allow for filming of the panelists, so we can then share to those who are unable to attend, so you in the audience will not be filmed. So just bear in mind, if you have a question and you don't want to reveal who you are, then just bear that in mind. But we won't be filming the audience. But we want this to be sort of as interactive as possible, so don't be put off by this slightly formal format at the moment. Without further ado, then I'll introduce Jawad Fayrouz, the chairman of Asylum, who has a few words in introduction.
Thank you very much, Björn. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so pleased to be with you today and hosting you, and thanks for our guests, Azhar, Gary, and Aisha, and our fourth colleague will join later on to participate with us this event. I was an asylum seeker, so I've already been through all this process that this gentleman and lady will talk about today. The idea started when we found that we shouldn't start from beginning whoever is applying for asylum. We should start wherever others ended. So we want to give a hand through the experts that they are having a specialty on this field, either through the process of the asylum application or through whatever regulations related to the Home Office or even later on for the either indefinite leave, definite leave, or later on for the citizenships. We know that all this process will take long time, and sometimes there are so many obstacles in the way that they have to be aware of on the legal side of it. For that reason, the idea came, that's why we don't get together, try to hear from the experts, from the advisors and the legal point of view on different angle of this issue. At the same time, our main objective is to write it down. We are planning to make like a booklet, like a guideline booklet. For that reason, we try to record these events, and later on, we will review it with the advisory of our guests to look at it. Then it will be like in two languages, Arabic and English, as a reference, whoever planning or thinking to know about the process of the asylum here. Part of our discussion today will be the cases of statelessness. We know that there is a large community in the Gulf who are called Budun, who are mainly in Kuwait. We want to tackle their issue too. They are being through certain process because they have been Budun, and maybe some points to be raised in this regard. I welcome you once again, and it is a really pleasant day for us to sit together and discuss this issue. And as my colleague Joshua explained, it will be informal, but let us first give a chance to the speaker to deliver their messages and their speeches, and we can hear to them. Then later on we can have comments and questions. I will repeat once again, the event will not be filmed to the audience, it will be just filmed to the panel. And whenever you want to ask the question, don't mention your name at all, just you mention your questions. Maybe your sound will be here, but never ever, neither your picture or your name will be mentioned at all. And in between, we're gonna have a short break, then we continue. We're supposed to finish by 4:30, depends how it goes at the most. Welcome once again, and yes, you can start. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Joab. So, yeah, like I said, yeah, without further ado then, if Gary, you have a short presentation.
Would you like to?
Shall I get that ready?
Do you want to?
Okay, sure, I'm happy to
stay
take that
here.
along.
Thank you.
Good.
Good afternoon, everybody. As already introduced, As already introduced, my name's Gary, and I'm an immigration solicitor based in Manchester. We have an office in Liverpool as well, and we also do some work in London. I began my career at the Home Office many years ago, and I was deciding asylum claims back in the 1980s. I know I don't look old enough, but it's true. I then moved into legal practice, and I've been working in this field for almost 30 years. My practice now is a split between refugee work and more general immigration and some corporate work as well. So I just wanted to give you a run through of the kind of the background. So a bit of legal background to start with, and then some practical tips on going through the asylum determination process. So, international protection is a term we use for both asylum, which is protection under the Geneva Convention on the Status of Refugees, and other international conventions to which the UK is a party. The UK's ratified pretty much all international conventions and agreements in relation to protection. But as lawyers, we tend to just refer to a few of these. So the Refugee Convention, European Convention on Human Rights, specifically Articles 2 and 3, which protect an individual from either death or inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment. The other international instruments, international agreements that we might refer to would include things like the Convention Against Torture, and of particular relevance to this audience would be the Convention on the Reduction of Statelessness, which is something that a lot of applicants from GCC countries, as Joe had mentioned, specifically the Badoon community from Kuwait primarily, they do rely on that. Statelessness is also something that arises in the Bahraini context. We've done a lot of work over so many years, basically since 2011 really, on asylum claims for Bahraini nationals. At first, the Bahrain government wasn't depriving people of citizenship, but increasingly that's a method the Bahrain government uses to essentially to control its population and to control dissent. So the Refugee Convention is, I suppose, number one on our list. The European Convention on Human Rights, you can kind of describe it as a safety net, really. It's because what you don't have to prove with a claim under the European Convention on Human Rights is the refugee definition. So the refugee definition can be challenging in some cases. So that's proving that you have a well-founded fear of being persecuted by one of the 5 what we call convention reasons in the Refugee Convention. So in a kind of a GCC context, that's typically persecution on political grounds or on grounds of religion. It might also include one's membership of a particular social group, somebody whose claim is based on their sexuality, for example. Sometimes a woman who's claiming asylum might be a member of a particular social group and be able to use that as a refugee convention reason. So, how do you claim asylum in the UK? Many people do it at the port of entry when they first arrive here. That's really what the Home Office would prefer you to do, if I'm honest. It has its advantages. It gets you in the system more quickly. It means you don't have to travel to Croydon. It also avoids the possibility of being treated as an illegal entrant. So an illegal entrant, as you might expect, is somebody who comes into the UK unlawfully, or the Home Office says you came into the UK unlawfully. And that can cause you problems in the future. For example, when you get to stay and you're naturalising British, if you've been an illegal entrant at any time, then that might not count towards your residence for naturalisation purposes. A lot of people we see, though, they don't claim on arrival in the UK. They might claim asylum having been here for another purpose. They might have come for studies, for example, and a risk to them might have arisen while they've been a student here in the UK. Similarly, people with a valid visit visa might arrive in the UK, come through the airport perfectly lawfully, and then make a claim for asylum at a later date, having taken legal advice. And the one thing I would always say is it's a good idea to get legal advice and to understand what your options are before you make the call to the asylum intake unit. I don't know how big, it's quite big on the screen, isn't it? So there's the phone number. I would always recommend getting some advice before you call that number, because once you've called it, once you've been given an appointment to go to the asylum intake unit in Croydon, you're in a process that it's very difficult to stop, and it can be very difficult to slow down. So if you're not properly prepared for your claim, then that can lead to problems. Specifically, if you're waiting for documents, for example, you might not have brought documents relating to your asylum claim with you. You might be waiting for them to be sent over by family members or whoever. Getting everything together and presenting it in one coherent case is far preferable than getting a piece of paper here and sending another piece of paper here, another witness statement here. It's much better to prepare your case in a coherent, structured way, and that's where a lawyer can really add value to your case. The other thing I would mention is it's possible to become a refugee and to make an asylum claim, even if when you left your country you didn't have a fear of going back there. That may arise, for example, through your activities here in the UK. If you're active on social media and you're critical of your government, that can lead to what's called a surplus protection claim, and it's perfectly fine. You can base a claim on activities after you left your home country. There's no rules against that. Evidence is obviously crucial to your protection claim. You will answer questions at an interview, but adding to that through external evidence, maybe documents, it may be other witnesses who know what you've been through, they are all going to help your claim. People find it much easier to put this kind of evidence together, again, with a lawyer. It's helpful as well. We've done a lot of work in Bahraini cases, and quite often the client has instructed a lawyer in Bahrain because they've been facing problems there, and we can liaise with the lawyer in Bahrain, although increasingly the lawyers are getting out of Bahrain. Stuff that's produced by the Home Office as well as organisations like Amnesty and Human Rights Watch. That will normally say, if what you're saying is true, you're going to be at risk. So you don't need an expert to say that again. What you might instruct an expert to do might be to say whether maybe an unusual aspect of your case is plausible, or is that something that really happens in a Bahraini prison. It's that kind of very specific information that you might consider getting expert evidence on. And going to a hearing on your own, well, with your lawyer, but on your own without any corroborative witnesses can be quite tricky as well. So your lawyer should be thinking about other people who, in your networks in the UK. It could even be someone abroad. The tribunal will take evidence via video link from witnesses abroad, and we've certainly done that. So always think about sources of external evidence, people who may be able to support your claim. Okay, so that's the basic asylum process. There's a couple of slides now about fresh claims. Fresh claims may be familiar to some of you. So this is where your case has failed the first time round. You've been through all the appeals processes and you've not got status from the Home Office. You might then work with a lawyer to prepare a fresh claim, and the point of these is that you have to rely on evidence that's new. It wasn't reasonably available to you previously, and it's capable of making producing a different outcome to your case. Again, it can be difficult. Ensuring that a fresh claim is viable is crucial. You don't just want to write a letter to the Home Office and say, no, I really am at risk. That's not going to get you anywhere. You're going to have to look at additional evidence. You're going to have to look at maybe updated evidence of the risks that you're facing in your own country. Fresh claims are processed a lot more quickly than they used to be. I would generally say a couple of months now. You have to travel to Liverpool to lodge a fresh claim unless there's special reasons why you can't travel. There are three possible outcomes, three possible decisions that the Home Office can make. It can either reject your fresh claim, which means it doesn't consider it amounts to a fresh claim. If they do that, you do not get a right of appeal against that decision. Your only remedy is judicial review. They can refuse your fresh claim but still give you a right of appeal, so you get to go to a tribunal again and appeal your decision. And the final possible outcome is that your claim is granted. So the Home Office again, they give you your 5 years. Legal representation is often a difficult thing to access. Many people will, with their first protection claim, see a legal aid lawyer. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong about legal aid lawyers. I was a legal aid lawyer for many years. I'm not anymore, but you know, you can get an extremely good standard of representation from a lawyer who's doing your case on legal aid. So don't think that that's necessarily a bad option. Conversely, some lawyers who will charge you money are pretty bad, you know, so you have to be careful. The difficulty is you don't know, you don't know if they're good or bad. You might go to somebody on a personal recommendation because they've won your friend's case. They might have got lucky with that case, you know. You don't know it. It's quite difficult. So I would normally, look online, look at their online presence, see if they've got, you know, Google reviews or anything like that, any other testimonials. A lot of law firms, and mine's included, will do a free initial consultation. You know, we will have an initial chat with you about your case and give you some guidance on how we might handle it if you wanted to instruct us. And remember, the lawyer is working for you as well. If you're not happy with what they're doing, and this is important as well for your case, if you're not happy, you should complain about the poor service that you've received, the poor advice, because the Home Office will expect you to do that. You can't just go to the Home Office in an interview or go to a tribunal before a judge and say, oh yeah, my old solicitor wasn't very good and he didn't do this, he didn't do that. You've got to put those things to your old solicitor. You've got to get a response, give them an opportunity to respond to the, you know, to the criticisms you're making of them. It is really important. And just, I would just say, always bear in mind that you can switch lawyer at any time. Don't switch every 5 minutes. That's probably not very productive, but you know, it's your case. So, working towards settlement. As I mentioned, 5-year residence requirement for refugees. I've mentioned a couple of issues there and the bullet points, which are particularly relevant to clients we've represented from GCC countries. Might not always be the main applicant, it might be a family member, but sometimes there's pressure or a temptation to return back to your home country once you've got refugee status. The Home Office will look at that. They will consider whether you've re-availed yourself of the protection of your home government. And it's not an automatic loss of refugee status, you don't automatically lose it, but the Home Office will probably write to you and say, tell us why you shouldn't lose your refugee status, because if you're going back, if you're still travelling on your national passport, for example, then that can lead to cessation of your, or revocation of your refugee status. So it's important, I think, to get advice if you're thinking of travelling. If you have a good reason to travel back to your home country, if there's a medical emergency with a family member, for example, then so long as that's supported with evidence, you know, medical evidence maybe, then that's not necessarily going to lose your refugee status. So don't think you can never go back, but just take care if you're thinking of doing that. And my final slide is family reunion. So a refugee has a right to have their family join them, but which family members? Well, it's very limited in the immigration rules. The rules only allow for spouses, long-term partners, and children under 18 to join you here in the UK.
Can you repeat it, please?
The only family members would be spouses, long-term partners, so that'd be more than 2 years duration of a relationship, which you have to be able to prove, and children who are under 18. So that's what's in the rules. The Home Office forget, however, that they have guidance on this, and they do allow other family members, so maybe parents, maybe brothers and sisters, who are even aged over 18. The guidance does permit those family members to join you here in the UK. It's more difficult. You generally have to prove dependency or that you were part of the same household, and you have to prove exceptional circumstances. So those cases can be tricky. But we got a decision on a Syrian client's family reunion application very recently, and the Home Office just ignored their policy. They didn't apply it at all. We were applying for parents of 3 brothers who are here as refugees, and they just refused them outright. They didn't look at the guidance. So always bear in mind that wider family members can potentially join a refugee here in the UK. So that's my whistle-stop tour of the refugee process. Thank you very much.
These issues which we can then share around. And thank you also to those who have since joined since the beginning. And all of the speech will be available online to watch afterwards for those who might miss some parts of it. So before, I'm sure some of you have some burning questions, and there'll be plenty of time for question and answer later on. But maybe now, if we hear from another speaker, so to my right is Asylum, who's a immigration consultant at Continent, which is a legal charity that provides various immigration services. So Aisha, is there anything off the back of that, or things that Gary may not have covered that? Let's say.
So Gary actually did a very good job covering all the basics of the refugee journey. But from a video clip that Continent has made, which we thought may be useful, maybe if we can load that up. It's actually in Arabic. It's about the appeal process, to give a more deeper understanding onto the appeal process, and hopefully we can take any questions or any practical tips that any of the audience may want to know.
Things on the Constant website. Is it about appeal?
So just on some practical tips, I can go through that while just loading up the link. It's also useful that, like, when client comes to the legal representative, that they feel open and free to share their entire story, so they're able to get full practical advice as to how to present their claim for asylum, and to basically discuss any available evidence that they may have.
Great, so the clip's already here. So I'll play this. So it's around 10 minutes, and we can share it around afterwards. It's very useful.
This one's in English, but there's also an Arabic version on the website.
Okay. Which one would be preferable, English or Arabic?
English would be okay.
English is okay?
Yeah.
And then here we can share here.
Yes.
Information to help you with your asylum appeal hearing. You're going to appeal. You applied for asylum, but your asylum claim has been refused by the Home Office, the government department that decides on asylum claims in the UK. You or your solicitor have appealed against this decision because you think it is wrong, and now your appeal is going to be heard by an independent judge at the first-tier tribunal. The tribunal is completely independent from the Home Office. This is your chance to try and get the Home Office decision changed so that your claim for asylum is allowed. My friends and I have been through the asylum appeals process ourselves. This is the information we wish you had known. We hope it will help you feel more confident about going to the tribunal. We know you'll feel worried about how your appeal will go. You may feel scared, confused, or anxious. This is normal. We hope that knowing what to expect will help to reassure you. Even though an appeal can be very challenging, try to keep a positive attitude. Preparing for your hearing. The most important thing is to prepare for your hearing. There are people who can help you, your solicitor and a local support group. A solicitor advises you and prepares your case. If you haven't got a solicitor, ask a support group to help you find one or use the Law Society's website. Your solicitor will prepare your witness statement. A witness statement explains any issues raised in your refusal letter or your interview records. Try to contribute to the witness statement to make sure it's accurate. Don't be afraid to correct any mistakes in the statement. Make sure you tell your solicitor everything that has happened to you, even if it's very hard and involves traumatic experiences such as rape, domestic violence, or torture. Ask your solicitor to explain the legal argument to you. If you find it difficult to speak or understand English, you should ask for an interpreter in your own language. The tribunal interpreter only works in the courtroom. Ask your solicitor to inform the tribunal in advance so that they can book an interpreter to attend the hearing and so that you can talk to your barrister outside the courtroom. If you are a woman who can't speak in front of men, maybe because your case involves sexual violence, discuss the option of requesting an all-female court with your solicitor, or put this on your appeal form. The tribunal will decide if this is possible. Before your hearing, reread any witness statements and your reasons for refusal letter. It's really important to think about questions you may be asked in the appeal hearing at the tribunal. In particular, think about the reasons given by the Home Office for refusing your asylum claim. Make sure you know where the tribunal is and the time and date of your hearing. If you live in accommodation provided by the Home Office, you can get a ticket to travel to the tribunal. You must take your notice of hearing to the Asylum Support Office, and they will send you a ticket. Knowing what to expect. It will really help if you know what to expect. Visit the tribunal in advance if possible. Your solicitor or support group may be able to help with this. You may be able to observe an appeal hearing as they are public. If you know anyone who has been to an appeal hearing, talk to them about it. Remember, your appeal is a positive opportunity to be heard by a judge and explain your case. It may overturn the original refusal. On the day of the hearing, make sure you get to the tribunal in time. Although your appeal will be listed for 10 a.m., make sure you arrive before then. Although it may look like the courts you see on TV, the tribunal is not for criminals. At the tribunal, everyone goes through security. You will go through a metal detector and your bags will be searched. This is to make sure everyone is safe. Do not take any sprays and aerosols, perfumes or deodorants, or mirrors as they will be kept by security. Let reception know that you've arrived. You will then wait near your courtroom. The court clerk will come out before 10 a.m. and ask your name. Your barrister represents you in the court. Arriving early may enable you to talk more privately to your barrister. Ask them if there is a private room available. You may have to wait several hours for your hearing, as the order is decided on the day. The tribunal starts cases until 4 p.m. Take food and drink with you, and any medication you might need while you're waiting. You won't be able to eat in the courtroom itself, but there will be water to drink. It's best to keep your mind active, so that you are alert when you go to court. Difficult experiences, like being tortured or raped, or harmed by a member of your family in your country. Use the exact word for what happened, even if it is hard to say, and makes you feel upset or ashamed. You may have to explain how things are in your country. The Hoppo's role is to test your evidence. They may challenge you or suggest that you are lying. If you feel upset or confused by a question, ask the Hoppo to repeat the question to give yourself time to think. If the hoppo is aggressive or rude, the judge should stop them. The judge can also ask you questions. This is your only chance to speak directly to the judge, but this doesn't always happen. If you speak to the judge, you call them sir or madam. You don't need to stand up. Judges have very different styles. Some are friendly and some are formal. You should try to let their style affect what you have to say. If there are witnesses to support your case, they will have to wait in the waiting area until it's their turn to speak. If you don't want a particular witness to hear the rest of your case, tell your barrister or the judge. That witness will then leave after they have given their evidence. Your friends will not be allowed to speak at the hearing unless there are witnesses. Ask your barrister or the judge if you don't understand anything that is happening, or if you need a break or to go to the toilet. After all the evidence has been heard, the hoppo will state why the Home Office has made its decision to refuse you asylum. Your barrister will tell the judge why the refusal is wrong. Your barrister will have the last word. You just get to listen. If you don't have a barrister, you will do this summing up yourself. At the end of the hearing can take from 30 minutes to several hours. The tribunal will usually stop for a 1-hour lunch break around 1 p.m. The judge will not normally give you a decision on the day. At the end of the hearing, the judge will tell you when you are likely to receive the decision about your case. If you haven't heard anything within 4 weeks, you should contact your solicitor if you have one, or contact the tribunal. Be prepared. You may find the hearing stressful or intimidating. It's hard to hear your life being discussed. It's hard to be questioned about things that have happened to you. You may feel relieved or satisfied with how the hearing went, or you may feel exhausted or disappointed. It may also feel good to have your say. If you have children, most tribunals do not provide childcare. Some judges will not allow your children to come into the courtroom. Be aware that having children with you at the tribunal can be distracting for everyone. You may also find it difficult to speak about your experiences in front of your children. One option is to arrange for someone to look after your children. Be aware this might be for the whole day. If your children are at school, arrange for a trusted friend or relative to collect them in case you are delayed at the tribunal. Sometimes hearings finish after 5 p.m. If you take your children with you to the tribunal, bring along a family member or friend who can look after them in the waiting area whilst you are in the courtroom. Bring toys or books to keep your children occupied during the day. After the hearing, you or your solicitor will receive the judge's decision. This may take a few weeks because the judge needs to reflect on the evidence and provide detailed reasons for their decision. When you get your decision, contact your solicitor immediately. If you are unsuccessful and you want to change the decision, you will need to apply for permission to appeal to a higher court within strict deadlines. You can only do this if you believe the judge made a serious mistake about the law. You cannot appeal simply because you disagree with the outcome. Be aware that even if you win your appeal, the Home Office might appeal against this. They can only do this if they believe the judge made a serious mistake about the law. Whatever the outcome, you can feel proud that you stood up for yourself.
Thanks very much for sharing that, which was very useful. And as you mentioned, it's also available online and in Arabic as well. Thanks very much. So yeah, I know it's a lot to take in from Gary's presentation, that video there. Does anyone are there any burning questions that anyone in the audience has? And yeah, also remember, just a reminder for those who came later, we're filming the event facing the panel here for those who are unable to attend, but just bear in mind if you don't want your name to be in the film, then yeah,
I don't say it, you know.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have a lot of questions for Gary and one question for Aisha.
Okay.
Gary, about 8 questions, you choose from them. What do you like? I'll say them quickly.
You need to complete it first.
Okay.
You need to complete it first. Then questions.
If you
Do you want, maybe we can hear from Azal first?
If you've got, yeah, maybe, okay, in that case, if there's so many
And Aisha
questions.
first, and then,
Yeah, yeah.
and then, you know, just our, maybe our, kind of the panel's reflections, and then we can do the questions at the end. Would that be, okay?
Yeah, that's really good, yeah, given you have so many questions, yeah.
You kind of started, didn't you?
Okay, I'll just give a few more practical tips then.
Yeah.
On the asylum process. So I mentioned about the client feeling free to basically disclose the sensitivity of their claim, so that the client or the solicitor is able to, or the asylum caseworker is able to assess and guide the client as to how to put forward their asylum claim. As a part of drafting that statement, it forms a useful tool for when you go on to do your full asylum interview, because often when you have legal representation, your statement is prepared in a more chronological fashion, and it makes sure it lists all the main events and circumstances that form a part of your asylum claim. Because often during the asylum interview process, the questions are not done in any order. So sometimes through nerves or general frustration, one can forget the basis of their own claim. Also, when you lodge an asylum application, you can also apply for support under the Asylum National Support Service. And the central body that handles that is employed by the Home Office, is Migrant Help, and they help you process for support. So under Section 95, you can get emergency support of accommodation, and either they will be accompanied with the shelter, or you may get some basic subsistence allowance. And often as a part of that support, it can also mean that you are dispersed outside of London.
Because I cannot hear you very well.
You can't hear me very
Yeah.
well? Okay.
Sorry, because I am.
No, that's fine. Okay, so I was just talking about the Asylum Support Service and how you're able to get support whilst your asylum claim is pending. And if you are granted Section 95 support, then it means you get lodging and some subsistence allowance. And the body that handles that is Migrant Help, which works in conjunction with the Home Office.
Who's the body?
Migrant Help. So that's all I have to say at this point.
And is anything, so on the right side we have Asylum, who's an immigration and human rights lawyer, practice based in Hounslow. So yeah, sorry to keep you waiting, but it'd be great to hear from you.
Thanks, Joshua. As Joshua told you that my name is Azhar Iqbal, and I'm a partner in a London-based law firm, Law Office Solicitors, and we normally deal with the human rights.
The voice is not.
Voice is now it's clear. No, can you hear now?
That's just for the camera. That's only for the camera.
That might be.
So you can go there.
I don't know. Maybe the speaker.
Should I come there?
Yeah.
Yeah, this will be.
I think let me go there. Okay, no problem. So, Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So my name is Asylum. I'm I'm partner in a London-based law firm, Law Solicitors. We normally deal with human rights cases, family and immigration. Most of the things Gary and Asha have covered in their presentations, and there's not too much to chip in. But I just want to add something, whatever I feel that I need to discuss it with you. When to claim asylum, as soon as you know that you have well-founded fear of persecution in your country and you can't return to your country. If you return to your country, you will be physically tortured or you will be killed. You need to claim asylum as soon as possible. And because sometimes it happens that, like Gary told you, that when you get into the country, when you arrive here, you don't have that fear. And in your when you are living in this country, and meanwhile something happens, the circumstances change, and you get that well-founded fear of persecution. But soon you know you need to inform to the Home Office, you need to claim asylum. And at the same time, if you are getting late to claim asylum, and if you have just delayed to get legal assistance on that what to do in that circumstances, if you are having some sort of well-founded fear. So you need to explain to because Home Office during interview, the Home Office, normally the caseworker asks the immigration officer that if you are having well-founded fear of persecution for a long time, why you didn't claim asylum before? Why you are coming to the Home Office after 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years? So you need to explain why you are late. It may be like you have lack of advice. You don't you are not obviously you are unaware about your legal rights that you can claim asylum in this country. Most of the things I have seen, it's in my notice that most of the people just ruin their cases just because they don't have proper legal advice. So that's very much important that you should have proper legal advice, and soon you know that if you are having well-founded fear of persecution, there is something available in this country where you can claim and you can get your right. So that will be more beneficial for you. Secondly, supporting documents. That is more important, that if you are claiming that you have life threats or you have well-founded fear of persecution in your country, so you need to produce, obviously you are telling Home Office that you have all this fear and you can't return to your country. You need to tell them that you have supporting documents. You have all the documents which can prove that you have this fear and you can't return to your country. Sometimes it happens that if you are claiming asylum, how you claim asylum, if you decided that you need to claim asylum, there are two ways. One, if you are entering the country at the same time, at airport you can claim asylum. But if something happens during your residence in this country, you need to contact the Home Office immediately, the asylum claim unit. You will call them, or your solicitor will call them. They will take an appointment for you, and normally in this country, here in London, you will go to the Croydon. On that appointment, they will ask you about some basic interview, maybe for 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours. So you need to be prepared. You can just request for legal aid, and you can get a solicitor from the government without paying anything. But in the same case, whether you are having legal aid or whether you are having private solicitor, what is the most important thing, that you should know that what's happening in your matter, in your case, because you can't just let them anyone know that whatever is happening that you should not know. You should know that if the court hearing is coming, or if any documents you have produced and they have submitted, what's happening in that matter. If you will in touch with the solicitor, whether it's private or it's legal aid, your case will be more well prepared and you will get a good decision on that one. Same thing, Aisha told you already that financial support is available. As I told you that legal aid is available. If you can't afford the private solicitor, legal aid is available. You can get a legal aid and a government solicitor. But at the same time, if you don't have enough financial means to support yourself for the purpose of maintenance, for accommodation, if you don't have like a good accommodation, if you don't have money to have your meals, then you can claim even that financial support from the government, and you will be able to give that financial support to accommodate you and to maintain you. Fresh claims, if you're like everything is all your appeal rights and your asylum claim is refused, you can submit your fresh claim. But fresh claim for the purpose of fresh claim, there is a separate like unit to submit the fresh claim. It is in Liverpool. You need to contact them. You need to contact them firstly on phone. You need to take an appointment, and then they will give you a proper time, a time and date to submit your all supporting documents in person. You can't submit by post until they permit you. You need to go there in person, and you need to submit all your documents for the purpose of further submission. And at the end of the day, then again on the basis of the documents, they can refuse your claim, they can allow your claim, and whatever will happen, you will just move forward legally, whatever legal remedies are available. Legal aid is available, I told you already. For the purpose of, because I have noticed just that no statelessness, because there is one topic on the statelessness, so I just want to add 2-3 things on statelessness. That sometimes it happens that you become stateless suddenly on the basis of any your opinion, your race, your religion, or anything can happen that your country may cancel your nationality, and soon your nationality will be cancelled, you become stateless. In that case, you have a right in all countries that in which country you are living, you can claim for leave to remain as a stateless person. But for that purpose, you need to produce all the supporting evidence. I have seen a few cases where the person claimed as a stateless person, and they got the nationality, all the passport, everything. But after many years, 10 years or 12 years, then suddenly the Home Office wrote them that why your nationality cannot be cancelled, because we understand, we just came to know that you submitted fake documents. So you need to make sure that there shouldn't be any fake document. Most of the time it happens that if you are claiming asylum, or if you are claiming your further leave as a stateless person, some friends may advise you that you can produce these documents, you can prepare these documents, which is not which in other sense, in true words, these are the fake documents. So don't go for that one. Always make sure that you need to avoid all these kind of rubbish advices. You need to go to a proper solicitor, and you need to go for a genuine legal advice and submit all the legal documents, because if you are submitting your fake documents, at the end of the day, even if you are just getting your whatever you are claiming asylum or the nationality in this country on the basis of stateless, after a few years, after a few months, soon the Home Office will know, they will cancel everything. So you need to make sure you need to follow the genuine legal advice. I have seen these cases that where the passport has been cancelled on the basis that you are not genuine. So make sure it should not be happen. From my side, it's done. If you need any question, thank you.
Yeah, maybe I think I've just heard that there's another